we've spoken a lot about some certain sectors that would take more of an L shape, and to some of your points, it's that we're actually not really in need of traveling right now. Tourism is a sector that is going to struggle, and I don't think there's probably much they can do in terms of, they're just going to have to wait to bounce back once we come back to a normal way of living. But what sectors do you think will need to pivot the most, in terms of they probably would take more of a U shape? Which sectors are we still needing to exist in today's climate, but will have to change the way in which they go to market and interact with their customers? Which sectors do you see will need to change the most?
So I think retail, I mean, non-essential retail is the one for me that has probably the biggest challenge on its hands in terms of, those shops are shut. But actually, Amazon is still selling all of those non-essential items through its online store. So unless those organizations, really ramp up their digital and online channels, there could be a big shift in consumer behavior after all this stops, right? I mean, there was a really interesting thing I read recently that said the SARS outbreak, I mean, it can't be a direct link, but the SARS outbreak in China led to the massive rise of Alibaba. And they're saying it was one of the impacts was, people not wanting to go out and shop. So this may, depending on how long this goes on for, this may well have a significant impact even further, unfortunately, on the decline of the retail store. And how do organizations pivot? I mean, I know it's interesting, the telco that many of us on the call actually work for started kind of thinking of its stores as more of an experience kind of center, and of course that works well for high-end retail or for things where there's a reasonable profit margin. But for the kind of high volume, low margin kind of stores, this is going to be a challenge unless they're able to kind of use their distribution centers and go direct to consumer, by bypassing their stores. So that one for me feels like the one that's has got the biggest challenge, but also the biggest opportunity to change the way it engages with its customer base and the way it sells.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. And actually, for myself, seeing marketing agencies, organizations that are helping others being able to get to market, it's going to be a big shift, because normally an integrated marketing approach and campaigns, they'll have an element of physical and virtual as part of them. Things like even sending direct mail to people at their place of work, or invitations to their place of work, and having people meet up physically. All of those things have now been lost, but they're still needing to create marketing campaigns. So the large shift to digital, and to your point again, Oliver, it's actually an opportunity to start using more tools and to start getting more personal with people in a way that they don't have to rely on the physicality of events. So that's another area where I've seen a shift of how they're going to have to change the way they go to market. Does anybody else have a point? So
yeah, I think one of the things is recruitment itself. It's one of the things that I've noticed. I think just the way you normally bring people into organization, inductions, everything will massively change. People are currently not really thinking about bringing on new people. They are pointing existing employees to different areas of work or different capabilities. You hear that a lot, even people being put to the front end into production or into supply chain, even though they are I think I've heard somebody like a business analyst and architects really doing just the work to move the goods along, rather because of the fact that they can't get their service workers in. So I think it's all hands to deck at the moment, but also how do you bring people in, and how do the traditional recruitment agencies respond to that?
Great, yeah, that's a great point. And to come over to you, Gaye.
Sure. So waiting is for some of the businesses might not be necessary, even if their current business model or current value proposition has changed, I think. So I guess if you can't really move, if you can't think, you're in under stress because of A, B, C, D, whether it's cash flow or things that you have to really, really look at. I think it's a great, so I don't want to say great opportunity, but it's a chance to look at what is the jobs to be done for, like, what are you serving that you satisfy jobs to be done of your clients, customers. And jobs to be done is a great example. Like, maybe you're a travel industry, maybe you're not able to sell travel, but you can, whatever they are looking for is like understanding and learning new places. Maybe you do some kind of different thing that you're serving to those people. So looking at jobs to be done is very important, because sometimes the value proposition is just what it is, but you can definitely pivot what it means. I'll give like a personal experience from one of my, it's a friend of a friend, and she was in like hospitality business in a restaurant, which she was not furloughed, she lost her job. What she realized is like she can act like a localized delivery person for this for farm produce. So she just set it up. She started to deliver that. Like, what she was trying to do is like the nutrition and people accessing to like good quality products. So she changed like how she does her business. So the more static propositions that we have and the bigger scale that we have, it might feel a little bit uncomfortable to try with new type of businesses, but at the same time, I feel the community at the moment is pretty much forgiving, and they are happy to, like, for businesses to try different things. They give their time to test, and I think it's a great opportunity to help people with their jobs to be done. And it requires a lot of like maybe soul searching and digging, like, I have been doing this business, but what business I'm in really? So I think you don't have to wait if you can continue.
Yeah, no, that's really nice. And it's nice the sort of the cultural impact and community impact it's having. It's really nice. So coming over to you, Luke.
Yeah, so everything what was just said is exactly true, and I agree completely. But this also leads to actually the times we are living in. So to the technology, everything right now so far was connected to the technology, and right now those attempts to make a pivot in the business are actually leading to the areas and to the trends that were rising before entire outbreak. So for example, becoming omni-channel, focusing on much more personalized customer experience, even removing the threat from the end users, like touchless experience and so on. All those suddenly become in a big boom shape where everyone are trying to explore and adopt. But some of the organizations, some of the businesses are at a very early stage, because so far they did not realize that there will be a need. They were somehow not trying to invest into those new areas, which is right now catching them in a very critical spot where they don't know how to quickly evolve and adapt, and from this second hand they have to. So it pretty much applies to every kind of the business in the world that is right now affected. Even for those who are not, they are just increasing the spending over those new things to be quicker and to get the bigger chunk of the market.
So I think those companies that need to pivot and what are they going to look at? If you, I guess if we look at what's gone away, we might talk about it in a bit, but what's gone away, I think, for a lot of people is that discretionary spend, i.e. that spend on non-essentials. That has kind of gone. No one's looking to buy a brand new car, or not many people are going to be looking to buy a brand new car at this time, and all those kind of that discretionary spend starts to disappear. So if your industry is serving discretionary spend, then you're probably looking at maybe a longer return, unless you can pivot or do something differently. So I like I've seen a number of companies as well kind of focusing on what do our customers currently need? Is there anything else extra that we can do that's maybe different to our core business model? It's an edge part of the business, and we have some footprint in the area, and they kind of looking to kind of build that capability up a bit more, but really focusing on I think the companies that are doing quite well, certainly on feedback, and you see them referenced in social media, those companies that are trying to help Maybe it's given away for free, but it's kind of building a bit of brand and loyalty with their customers and really focusing on the customer experience being a key part of that. What do our customers need in this time? And building, even small portals, small help sites. What's the industry doing? How can we give information? We've seen a lot of the consultancies, which Ryan and Oliver you've referenced already, providing more free materials than perhaps they may have done in the past. It's really useful, really good content material that are helping kind of companies look at and see where they need to move to. You also, Gaia, you talked about a little bit around how I'll call it the value streams, how the end-to-end is working, and how, maybe quite simply you can identify what is now broken in your company or business value stream that you can fix or move or pivot. But I guess ultimately, all businesses need two simple things, which is that demand and a way to fulfill that demand through the supply. And depending on your sector and what you're doing, you're going to have different impacts on that, and that's going to make it difficult to understand where you might need to pivot to, what you can do if you have lost most of your customers, and is it kind of keeping them on board? What's the heartbeat, the tick over? Is there something else we talked about? Is there something else you can move across that's maybe not your core part of the business? But allows you to sustain and maybe grow a little bit in these times. So I guess it's kind of trying to synergize all of those things to see what you can do. Obviously, you're probably sat there as a business trying to protect your capital and what cash flow you do have as well. So it's about taking kind of small, valuable steps. I don't think anyone's going to be, we'll talk about this later perhaps, I don't think anyone's going to be plowing in huge amounts of money at the moment. It's about what can you pivot to that is going to provide some value to your customers and your business model at this time, really.
Yeah, definitely. And so coming back to Petra.
Yeah, I one of the big things that just really hit me is that, and I think is the uncertainty of time. So some industries require us to go back to where we were, or to a certain extent, and will we? No, because right now we don't really know. I mean, I'm in a situation, I don't know. Is this going to be a week, 3 weeks, 6 months? We don't really know. We don't know what the strategy is around, re-entering the normal world, with regards to the virus and how we structure that, because we're all talking about the curve and making sure that we've got these services to deal with people. So that means there needs to be some kind of stepped approach to how we get back to, between quotes, normal. And will normal have been postponed too long for us to think that normal still exists to go back to? And therefore is what we have now the new normal? And do we need to create models that allow us to just react faster? And what do we do with the aftermath? So those are the things that are just, listening to all of you, come to mind as to how do we do that? Because right now, this is the whole thing where people like to start change, stop change, start change, stop change. And we were already getting to that world where we are in perpetual change, but now we're seeing, we might have to remain in that perpetual change, and that ability to change is what we need to facilitate, really.
I've talked a bit before about change being kind of the only I think we talked about it last time on the last call, change being the only constant, and the kind of Eddie Obeng quote I blogged about recently, the world after midnight. In other words, the world is now moving so fast, we're barely reacting, let alone kind of keeping up. So this kind of new sort of era of just constantly adapting and shifting. But one thing I did want to touch on is which we haven't really talked about, is kind of the manufacturing side. Clearly, there's retail, which is at the end of the supply chain. But for manufacturing, some of this stuff isn't just going to be as simple as putting the workforce back in place. Some industrial processes, manufacturing processes are very expensive to kind of get back up and running again, and quite timely. And some businesses may just not have the capital in order to kind of get going again. So it's quite scary, I'm sure, for many folks in the manufacturing space as well.
there might not be any uptake for your products anymore.
So I think all you can do at the moment, given the vast uncertainty about how long this is gonna do, is you can take a start point and kind of capture what do you know, what are those key assumptions, and what are the key impacts. So we've talked about the market's taken a shock, it's still volatile, so that's known, that's kind of there. We think most of the customer discretionary spend is all but gone in most areas. We know supply chains are disrupted. We know there is government support and deferrals and so on that the government's put in place across the globe in different variations. And we know that we're in a sustained lockdown for weeks, if not months. But there's still some good things behind this in terms of the infrastructure and technology that many countries and companies have is still there. The virus hasn't taken those out. So we still have, 5G is coming along. Gaye talked about blockchain. There's changes coming in blockchain around proof of concept versus proof of stake and things like this. He's going to kind of change this. They're still there. IoT, the work that's going into helping climate change and environment impact with renewables and the commercialization of space, these things are still there. So that infrastructure and technology hasn't gone away. So those are a set of knowns as well. But it's really about are the aspirations and the capital and the customers and that demand, how does that come back, and how long does it take for that to come back? And I think that will drive a lot of what happens. But at least you've got a set of knowns for your business and company. You can make some sensible decisions and scenarios. And I think that's a key role of the architect, really, to help put these things into context to allow some quality informed decisions to be made.
Start building models of your organization in the new normal.
Yeah.
I will suggest a book that I'm reading, and I find it inspiring, not to necessarily aim for it, but definitely take some examples from it. It's called Extreme Economies. And it talks about like economies and markets in survival areas, in failure areas, and in future areas where like there's, I think, a couple of examples. And economic activity, like which we see in the areas, is very much human self expression. And even if it's wiped out in some areas, we see that it's coming back in more organic ways. So I believe like this organic approaches, organic strategies to business is something to start to implement right now, not necessarily saying that we are in a survival mode, but it just makes it much more immune, decentralized organic strategies. And it's you try and see what sticks, and I don't think there's whatever comes back after, once you have the approach of immunity and adaptability, it works.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. In fact, they're all really good points around how do organizations and how do workforces become more resilient to change. And I think a lot of the examples that you guys are giving are around constant change, and actually the technology is at a point where we can become more resilient. So actually, how do you believe that the COVID-19 pandemic will affect future IT projects and IT spend? What do you think we'll see? And if we start with yourself, Luke.
Thanks. So I heard during last week several times one funny sentence, especially funny for me. Digital transformation is burned. For most of the SMEs and enterprises that I'm talking to that were in the middle of the transformation, they took a long plan, 3 years, how we'll become a digital, how we will diversify our channels and products. That transformation suddenly stopped, and they started to wonder how to not waste all of that investment that we've made so far and adapt to new reality that we will live in for some time, unknown time, as Petra already noticed. So From that standpoint, on the market we are seeing the need for simplification, the investments into IT that were postponed for years to move away from the legacy stuff that were holding us back, or to reinvent some parts of the business models to the newest technologies. Right now, probably after we'll get in better shape on the economical part, will get into the radars of those organizations, and they will seek how to unify the portfolios, how to simplify the products, how to actually bounce from old technology to the new ones, because the adoption of the latest trends, as I mentioned before, will require that step. So this is what I'm seeing quite a lot these days.
Right, yeah, that's really interesting. And has anybody else seen anything like that, Guy?
I assume that definitely there will be activities of more decentralization anywhere you can. Doesn't need to be like you're stepping onto blockchain. It could be any part of the value stream, like even from ideas to delivery to supply chain to. I definitely see like there will be more of these projects, and I encourage this. Like I'll give you an example from before like all of this happened. Just in one project. I'll give the example and it will make sense why it is useful. So we were working on a reinsurance data reconciliation project where we introduced decentralization, and data reconciliation is not an issue anymore. And there was a startup that came to pitch us like how they improve data reconciliation. And once we understood what they're about, like the meeting was 15 minutes, it lasted for 15 minutes because we didn't have the problem anymore. So there are some approaches, like it doesn't have to be technology. Once you introduce that, you eradicate the problem that you have, at least like for one particular area. So I assume those activities will be much more prominent in the IT projects, like not necessarily years and years of contracts. All of them will be very much seed to precede activities where you're looking at ventures and solutions, and some of them will die, but I see definitely much more of this becoming prominent in many of the sectors and enterprises and medium enterprises as well, really.
I think one of the big things is contracts for systems and environments that really don't exist anymore and not going to be continued post whatever the post situation is, if it ever comes. But I think that's something that will be part of that overall rationalization for the organization, things they need to progress and not progress. But I think that will have a further knock-on effect on organizations that are currently seeing their business being potentially postponed, but even having a greater effect of services not continued or contract not continued.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or contracts that they cannot get out of and have to maintain because they are just obliged to do so by law, and you know, will struggle to continue beyond that.
That's a good point, Petra. I'm aware of a number of companies, unfortunately, having to, and this is why the clauses in the contract is starting to call on force majeure clauses in the contract to because they just can't afford to continue with some of the contracted services.
We've touched on this on the last call around kind of winning in the turns, and this being sort of a time where things will need to change, and those that are perhaps more bold, perhaps I accept the fact that there won't be an awful lot of capital floating around, but what there may well be is manpower available to do things differently. So I think the kind of things being more dynamic, more changeable with its contracting models, whether it's kind of using more crowdsourcing, as I think Gaia was saying, it doesn't have to all just be about decentralization. Isn't necessarily just about blockchain. It could be about how you get your ideas and how you engage with your customers and your market. But for me, if we look at the sort of technology side of this, I mean, clearly where we as a company are living and breathing, having a more adaptable, dynamic kind of architecture and systems and platforms that allow you to see what you've got going on in your organization and allow you to check that all of a sudden you've got a massive influx of demand on your online channel. Well, can you handle that? And can you get visibility of that? Can you see what it's doing to your legacy systems and kind of have that end-to-end visibility? I think this end-to-end visibility picture has been super important for many people that I've been talking to, is because all of a sudden you've got people in remote working situations with perhaps their own device or with a new laptop or a new asset that's just been issued to them and they've never had a laptop before. So kind of having that ability to see what your technology landscape looks like is pretty important for folks as well. Ultimately, these changes in business model and operating model will have a knock-on impact to how technology gets used, and how do you risk manage that, as we've touched on earlier. Clearly the risk department's gone on overdrive now. They're constantly looking at what this means now for the risk picture, and how do you start to mitigate that and respond to that. I think is going to be a big learning lesson for many folks, and the folks that can afford to improve their BCP planning and their sort of non-functionals probably will. Those that can't, that's probably not going to be the top of their priority anyway. They're looking at how they get out of that L situation. So yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
Okay, so I think to round up the conversation, just to come back to the architecture community, in these times, in these uncertain times where we are, and as we've been speaking about it, companies are trying to become more lean, trying to come away from all of the stuff that isn't business critical. How do we justify increased investment into architecture projects and spends?
So I think that there's probably a couple of different parts of spend when we talk about architecture. It can be the resources and services an architecture team, the policy, processes and practices that can bring, and also the eventually, I guess, the enabling architecture roadmaps, those features and big epics that will want to be put in, that will enable a business to go after the value. So I think, in terms of architecture's role at the moment, it's really critical that they're involved in supporting the now and planning the next. There are a few articles out there as well. I think McKinsey talk about it quite nicely as well, about having these response teams, fire teams, response teams, and I think the role of the architect, certainly from that perspective, should be a key part of that, and should really help put that. And we've talked about putting maybe a magnifying glass over what's a must-have and what's a nice to have, what do we get rid of, what do we stop, start, and continue. So that could be that's a really good big focus for architecture. And obviously, mitigating the fact that if we do stop something, what's the debt look like? What's the liability? What are we leaving behind as well? That's a key role. And I think, the architect should be there as well, looking at, if we're looking at what's next, is looking at, we talked about this more about, if we got the right, is the business model there? What's the context, the environment we're working in? We talked about some of the known knowns, but they should be there to kind of help with that as well, and have the senior leadership team and the CX suite kind of being able to make really good informed decisions about, is our business model intact? When are the customers coming back? When's the demand coming back? Looking at the helping support and look at the value streams. And the idea is, Ryan, and you mentioned what's the value architecture, and should we still be investing? Well, if we've already invested in the architecture, answering these questions become a bit simpler, I think, because you can visualize the landscape as Ollie talked about. You know what your value streams look like, where your business capabilities are and the technology that supports it. Now, a lot of this many companies won't have, and is often only within reach of the medium and large corporations, or some of the new startups that have got this kind of information, skill set and capabilities to hand. And then the architect as well there, with obviously with the rest of the team looking at, we talked about the operator model as well. When we come back, what are the right people, processes and technology changes and so on that we need to make. I think, and it doesn't have to be huge spend. It can be small, valuable increments. Well, I think we talked about that. We don't have to talk about loads to make an impact. It might be as simple as let's put in some really good unified communication tool sets across the business and do that quickly. Well, how do we do that? Who are the best people that we can partner with, or and have we got the skill sets and capabilities in-house to do it with our IT team? So all of these things can be done. I don't think it has to be a big spend. And I guess another key part for me as well is about that journey to being more business agile? How do we leverage that? How can the architects put in that? SAFE is really good at that. If you've got a really good, mature, safe practice, I know Petra, that's part of your field as well. So all of these things. So I think, and it doesn't have to be big spend. It can be using the resources that you have that maybe you can't deploy currently in their current roles to help support some of these changes, or looking at some of the smaller investments that you might need to make to move your core business model to be a little bit more diversified if you can seize those opportunities.
Nice, yeah, great. And so, Guy, do you agree with those points? Do you have something to add?
Definitely. I think it's the most even double activity for architects that's needed. And I'm a bit like fluid in my definition of architecture, as I said, being systems architect, software architect, enterprise architect, ecosystems. And the way I see it is like integrating change to the ship. And now it's the most like agile, it's the immune system, it's the governance related, it's security and risk related. So the job is even like double at the moment to be able to like, to at least afloat the ship really. So integrating change and scouting those changes is much more prominent than ever. And what I see like in between all of these architecture practices, different disciplines, systems thinking is very much prominent. And the more like the systems that we are working on, land systems, I don't necessarily mean technology, anything and everything is getting much more complex. So complex system thinking is a skill that architects generally do have. And that's what the times really demand. So I find it really helpful to see through systems and to be able to define, even change, not only the enterprise that you are in, but the practice as well, to respond to the fastness of the change. Yeah.
For sure. Great. Yeah. And Luke, I see, did you have a point to add to that?
Yeah, so from my perspective, the role of the architects, at least in the areas where I'm working in, is actually to move closer to the business more than ever, break all the walls, to support the business in taking the decisions and explaining some of the things that are happening on the market, not only from the technical side of things, because we found ourselves in a situation where actually making all those quick turns, as Karsten already mentioned, is the most valuable and most critical thing that can justify any kind of the investment in hard times. The second thing is the shift from thinking about the pure business and ROI towards more customer-centric and customer experience, where the actual value of new businesses and new revenue streams can be generated for longer, not only in reaction to the current crisis. So this is the central point for me, for architects and their knowledge and all the skills and ability to connect business with the technology. So actually business agility, transforming the business challenge into technical solution, where we should reside and where we should focus to become successful for our customers.
Great. Yeah. So a lot on the shoulders of the architects right now. So yeah, coming back to you, Petra.
Yeah, I think just responding to what Karsten said, I think it's also the fact that there won't be that much cash flow. So it's about what is being spent needs to be spent very wisely and on the things that basically have the highest return for the organization, so that the organization can sustain itself. And it's even more important that we understand where that value is, and that we can make that visible and transparent to the organization, and also understand where to stop spending, and that might be even more important.
Okay, so Oliver, did you have any final words you wanted to say on this?
Well, no, I think it's been another great discussion, and thanks everyone for their time. I think it's going to be interesting, isn't it, to continue to watch for the cues for when things return to normal, or whether this becomes the new normal. I think there's a lot of debate online, about where things are going to head, and of course everyone, ourselves included, are doing a little bit of crystal ball gazing, which is which is always a bit dangerous because then people play this video in the future and say, he said that this was going to happen and it never did. But no, I think it's prudent for us as architects to kind of support our organizations through this sort of uncertain time. And I think we were talking earlier about the fact we need to be able to respond rapidly. That's, you know, respond rapidly to a changing, dynamic, fluid situation, and support our organizations the best we can. And that for me is the best way to provide value right now, is to be dynamic and offer that advice and support, and not go into kind of classic enterprise architecture mode if that's where you were before all this happened, of, you know, lots and lots of thinking before you kind of give value. It's got to be far more agile and closer to the time to value, so to speak. So, but no, I'll reiterate the fact it's been another great chat. I look forward to our next one. Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Looking forward
Cheers,
for the
guys.
next session.
Cheers.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.